hello, everyone. And, welcome to what Mike and I are calling the supplemental episode for the Trapped at Work Act. And actually, Mike, I should step back and welcome everybody. I was so excited about the topic, but welcome everybody to Barclay David's Labor and Employment podcast. I am Rosemary Enright, based in Buffalo, New York. I'm joined by Michael Sciotti, who's sitting in Syracuse. And I have to say, Mike, a beautiful day here in Buffalo today. Cold, but beautiful.
I would agree. It is the same here, and there's something in the sky. I wasn't sure what it was, but I think it's the sun.
Oh, I knew that's where you were going with it. Exactly. Yeah. It's brilliant sunshine today. In fact, I had a call with someone and I made it a walk and talk. So I walked up Delaware Avenue because it was so nice. So anyway, but for those for our loyal listeners, you may be thinking, well, wait a second. I was listening to the whole handbook series. Why are you now talking about the Trapped at Work Act? And that is because our second episode, we talked about it and promised that if we were expecting changes or amendments, and we promised that if those came through, we would immediately, get right to the, what is that saying? Hot off the presses, I guess. We'd get right
Hot off the presses.
That's right. So that's why we wanted to jump in. So, the next episode will then return to the handbook series that we were doing. So anyway, all right, Mike, before we jump in, we got the question for you. So this episode's question is, what was your favorite cereal as a child? Breakfast cereal as a child?
So thank you for the softball. I will change the word was to was and still is. So Lucky Charms, of course.
And you know what? I love that. Is mine too. That is mine too, Mike. Lucky Charms. And here's the question, Mike. When I eat Lucky Charms, I'll eat all the brown, I guess that would be the oats or whatever. And I try to leave as many marshmallows as I can. I mean, I'll eat a marshmallow here or there, but I like at the end to have the bowl of all the marshmallows floating on top, and then I eat them. So.
Wow. All right. Different.
So you just eat it? You just eat it? That's great. All right. Well, there you go. All right. Well, so there you have it, folks. Lucky Charms. That's the first time we've both landed on the same answer. So, all right. So with that said, Mike, let's get started. So first and foremost, everybody, breathe. All right. I said to Mike, I'm going to tell everybody, just breathe. Initially, the Trapped at Work Act went into effect in December of 2025, which is why we immediately, in our second episode, talked about it. Well, that has now been paused. And the new effective date is December 19th. So it's an early holiday gift for everybody, but December 19th of 2026. So that means you have almost 10 full months to get everything in order. All right. So that's why we say breathe. So December 19th, 2026. So the end of this year. All right. And what we want to do now is we initially thought we'd go through the Trapped at Work Act, but since this is a supplement, we're going to hit on the changes. Those things, and most of the changes, Mike, I would say, tell me if you agree, were clarifications, right? The department, they clarified a lot of questions we all had. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, I would agree with that to the extent it describes what we're talking about here, meaning what agreements qualify as trapping employees. Some of the other stuff, which we'll talk about in a second, I do view as substantive changes. Both the two things that come to mind is now the Department of Labor is mandated to evaluate certain factors before they impose a fine. And second of all, those of you that listened to the original podcast realize there was a definition in there called worker. So that included independent contractors. Now the scope of the law has been revised only for employees, but the agreements, they had to clarify it because a lot of employers were up in arms.
Exactly. And it was confusing too. I mean, people were up in arms. It was also, we were uncertain, right, Mike? We were just, well, we think it means this, but we're not certain. So that is helpful to all of us. And so as Mike said, the definition, they've eliminated worker and it's now employee and employer. Basically, the definitions, Mike, are consistent with the New York State Department of Labor's definition of employer and employee.
Correct. And I would just add one thing just for clarification. We said in the original podcast, employee also includes prospective employee / applicant. So just keep that in mind, everyone.
Yeah, that's a great point, Mike. Thanks. I had forgotten about that. So, all right. So we wanted to start with that, obviously. So that is a change. And so we'll get into the other changes here in a second. But what I first want to say, Mike, is that the core rule, and again, tell me if you agree with this, the core rule is still essentially the same. So an employer cannot or may not require an employee as a condition of employment to make a repayment unless it falls within one of the applicable exceptions. And that was the intent of it initially, and that core still applies. So would you agree with that, Mike?
I totally agree with it, and I think when we go through the exceptions, this law now makes a little bit more sense. But it does change, everyone. The advice that Rosemary, myself, our colleagues have been given out for decades has now changed, and you just need to be cognizant of that. Take this, in essence, 9 months we have before the effective date of the law to inventory what you have, take a look, revise it so it complies. And the other thing that's going to go hand in hand with this, Rosemary, is your handbook. I know this is probably going to pop in the middle of our handbook episodes, but it's actually not a bad place for it to. One of the things you're going to have to pay attention to now is defining the term misconduct in your handbook. I know the Department of Labor is going to issue some guidance between now and December, we hope. And they've been directed to, and maybe they'll define it for us. But I think your best bet right now is a good common sense definition of misconduct.
Yeah, and Will, you're probably sitting there thinking, well, why? Why do we have to do that? We'll talk about that. We'll talk about that in a minute. So again, trapped at work, we're talking employers are prohibited from requiring employees to repay. All right, repay funds unless they fall into one of the exceptions. So let's talk about, Mike, the expanded exceptions. So one of them, the first one that comes to mind, because all of us were talking about it, was the tuition assistance and that. So talk to us about that.
After when we saw the first version of the law, it one of the things it scooped up and probably didn't mean to was employers paying for employees' tuition, or maybe the employee paying and then the employer reimbursing. That sort of fell within the meaning of the law. Now we have a nice carve out for these what I call degree certificate type situations. But they have nailed it with 5 specific points, and this must be in writing. So it's not something that you can verbally agree to. If you want to take advantage of what I call the tuition exception, you're going to have all 5 of these items listed. And do you want me to go into those now, or do you want to?
No, yeah, let's start. Well, first of all, so let's talk about the definition. When we talk about when we're talking about this exception, so the language is the cost of tuition, fees, and required educational materials for a transferable credential, a transferable credential. All right, and so let's talk about So let's start with that, Mike. So go ahead.
Yeah, so they added a definition of transferable credential. It's fairly long, and there are two exceptions. Generally, and I mean generally, this is going to be degree, a diploma, a license, certificate, or something else that they sort of put in there a catch-all for it that it is. It is something that is educational, maybe beyond the scope of the workplace. Maybe you have an employee working for you, and they're a machine operator, and at night they're going to get their CPA, and they want to be an accountant, and they're getting an accounting degree. That's what we're talking about. And then what they did is create two exceptions to that to clarify that these are not transferable credentials. Anything that's mandatory safety or compliance training. So many employees have to undergo some type of OSHA training. All employers in New York have to undergo and give to their employees sexual harassment prevention training. That's one of the exceptions that says, no, this is not, that does not qualify. The other one they call a employer-specific or non-transferable training. So let's say you're Coca-Cola and you expose the employee to the formula for Coca-Cola and how you make it. That is a employer-specific item, and you cannot try to make that a transferable credential because it's going to fail on its face. Also, if it's instruction, they call it instruction that does not qualify the employee for a new occupational title, classification, etc. And that one, I read them both, and I'm sort of like, I think there's more to come on this one. I think they're going to give us lots of examples. They really have zero examples here for us. But I think generally speaking, this is going to be enough to get us going to sort of figure this out as we move forward.
Yeah, and you know, same. Can tell me if you agree with this. I think that if it is, specific to you as an employer, whatever it's, very specific to you, and they can't really use any of the skill or the training somewhere else, then guess what? It doesn't fit in this carve out. It's just that simple. It's just that simple, right? But anything that they could go somewhere else and use it, then that qualifies for the carve out. So it's just that straightforward. Now, so we've got that, Mike, and so there are the five, like you said, the five things. I think that's how you said, the five that you need to keep in mind. And so again, we're talking right now about the tuition repayment exception. So this carve out. So it's got to be in writing, as we always say. If it isn't written down, never happened, right? So this is just another example of that. And I'll start us off with the first one because it's easy, Mike, and then we'll go back and forth. I'm kidding, but no. But the first is that the requirements. All right, so the agreement it has to be a standalone agreement that is offered separate and apart from any employment agreement, all right, that this individual has. And the thinking behind that, we believe, is that somebody's trying to decide, they're looking for employment, and they've now got this employment agreement that's got all of these terms and conditions, and then all of a sudden within it is this tuition repayment, these terms for a tuition repayment, and they don't want them to have that pressure. Again, it's almost, the way I think of it, Mike, is this is called the Trapped at Work Act. Well, if you then put this within an employment agreement, they're still kind of trapped, aren't they? Because they can only accept the position, right, or sign that employment agreement if they agree to whatever those terms are, which is why they want it standalone.
Yep.
So this written document in which you're talking about the tuition repayment must be a standalone agreement. That's the first of the 5 that we're going to talk about. You want
Yeah,
to add to that, Mike?
I would add, they use the term agreement, and I would add the following: dated and signed by the employee. They're not saying that specifically, they're implying it. But I think going back to, if it's not in writing, it did not occur. This is something beyond an an employee handbook provision. This is something where we want to stand alone. We want the employee to put their John Hancock on it, sign and date it, and let's be clear that what this is. Title it properly. Don't go overbroad. This is a standalone. Don't try to combine it with anything.
Yeah, that's a great point. That's a great point. So that's number 1. Number 2, what's number 2, Mike, in your list?
This agreement does not require the employee to obtain a transferable credential as part of their employment. So what we talked about a few minutes ago, because then you're outside the exception.
Yeah, exactly. All right, so that one's pretty easy. Then I'll jump in with the third, which is that you actually have to, in this agreement, you have to specify the repayment amount, and it's got to be beforehand. All right, so it's actually, you're going to actually put in the agreement, this is the amount that will be repaid, and that is for tuition, fees, and any required educational materials for the transferable credential. So what does that mean? Well, we get that, Rosemary. Of course, that's what we put in. Well, some employers might have interest in there. They might have fees in there, right? So the fee to process it, whatever those fees might be, you can't do that. So it's ahead of time. You say, this is what the amount will be that needs to be repaid. And it is literally just the tuition fees and any cost of educational materials, nothing else.
Yeah, and I think here we're going to just a little record keeping. Get the bill if it's and make sure we keep that as part of our record keeping, and make sure there's nothing on the bill that's not supposed to be. So if there is, don't go there. Just keep it simple. Get the bill. Maintain the copy of the bill. And I think that is what you're looking for here. Nice and simple.
Yeah, I agree. All right. Next up. All right.
Yeah. Number 4 is no acceleration clause and proportional repayment. So how they describe it is the agreement provides for prorated repayment amount during any required employment period that is proportional to the total repayment amount and the length required how they say it, the length of the required employment period. So I think it's reasonable. This is where reasonableness and common sense come into play. And this is where I think you use some charts or some, if you leave before this, it's X. If you leave before this, it's X. If you leave before this, it's Y. And they haven't really explained to us this and what it means and how they are going to look at it. I think we're going to have to wait for the guidance from the Department of Labor to sort of fill in the gap here. But the reality is, and I think right now, as we're in this 9 months leading up to December, proportional repayment, no acceleration. Those are the two concepts that we have to work into the agreement, or in the case of acceleration, make sure it's not in the agreement. And then I think we sort of take a wait and see approach as we go forward. So if let's say in June you prepare one of these agreements, and you think you've been reasonable, and you think the proportional um, scale that you put in there is okay. And then in November, the Department of Labor rolls out their regulations and we have to change it. We need to change it. And I can guarantee you, folks, we'll do another podcast once those regulations get rolled out, because I think it's going to help fill in some of these, what I call them, I don't want to say wishy-washy terms, but terms subject to multiple interpretations.
Yeah, that's a good way to say it. But I will say, at least we've got more clarity than we had before, Mike.
I agree.
Yeah, lots of discussion around this tuition. This came up a lot, so I'm glad we have this. And then the fifth. Now, again, remember what we're talking about here, gang, is the agreement that you've got, the standalone agreement that must be in writing for the tuition carve out. So the fifth and final piece that needs to be included in that agreement is the statement that repayment is not required if the employee is terminated. And they say that, and everybody gets caught. Well, they're terminated. Remember, terminated could be they resigned, right? Basically, it's the termination of employment. Employment ended. All right. The exception is if the employee is terminated for misconduct, which is why Mike brought that up, which is why he said, look at your handbook and how it's defined. All right. And so this is one of those areas, to use Mike's term, wishy-washy. They weren't specific or explicit about termination when it comes to, let's say, a layoff or something like that. But based on the way it's written, one can infer that basically, other than termination for misconduct, there should be no repayment requirement.
I agree. I totally agree. A couple things. Number one, I think you're going to do one of two things, or maybe both. Define misconduct in your handbook and refer to that section in the agreement, or define misconduct in the agreement and make sure those two definitions match, or maybe both. Yeah. I think we need to be guided here by, believe it or not, case law, Rosemary, in the employment agreement context, because a lot of times employment agreements have a term that says, unless terminated for misconduct or gross misconduct. This has to be something that's bad. Johnny was late, doesn't qualify. Johnny did a bad job, doesn't qualify. Johnny punched his supervisor, I think that qualifies. It needs to also be take a look at your code of conduct. Remember, in our handbook, we talked about the National Labor Relations Board and not going overbroad. But I think references to some code of conduct may be in order. One of the things, violation of the sexual harassment policy, I think that qualifies.
I agree.
Some things I'm also guided by, under the Fair Labor Standards Act, the exempt employees docking rule. Employee engages in a major safety violation, lighting a cigarette in a room filled with dynamite. Yeah, I think that qualifies. So I think we just have to use some common sense. I also think, as with the last one, that the Department of Labor will come out and give us a definition, or at least examples, when their website goes live, their guidance goes live, and their regulations go live.
Yeah. I love that, Mike, you saying, think about it. It's common sense, because somebody's late. I don't think that's going to qualify. So I think that's great. So that's our first. Oh, go ahead, Mike.
Yeah. And I've read some commentators' article on what this means. And I read one article, and it shocked me that they said a workforce reduction might qualify. And I'm like, I disagree. So be careful what you're reading out there. Some of the stuff just didn't make a lot of sense to me. Yeah. And so be careful. I think this has to be really bad to fall into that misconduct.
I think you're right, because you go back to, Mike, what is the purpose of the act? Why was it implemented or enacted? And so, but we don't want the Department of Labor looking and saying, you know what, this is pretext. It's a way for you to get this repayment, to get this money, right? And hold the employee accountable. So we don't want to get into that. So
Yeah, and let me add one thing. Let's take a step way back. Be fair to your employees. If you don't want them leaving, treat them great. Be nice to them. That I know that's not legal, but I always say the backdrop to this is: are you a good employer? How do you treat your employees? That is a lot here. Some employers don't worry about these agreements and never have, because they said, well, if he wants to leave, he can leave, but he's not going to find a better paying job or better working conditions than with us. Okay.
yeah, that's fair. That's fair. Yeah. Okay. All right. So that's our first kind of significant, change, Mike. So, second one has to do with the non-educational incentives, right? And payments. So what say you there?
Yeah. So here the law is a little clearer for us. Um, we're talking about financial bonuses, relocation assistance, or other non-educational incentives, or other payments, or other payment. So the other payments, like a catch-all, it's got to be something similar. But what we're looking at: did you give the employee a bonus? Did you pay a relocation expense, or some other non-educational incentive? Um, these cannot be tied to what they call specific job performance. So I guess if you're being a bad employee, these are things like, hey, we're moving you from Atlanta to Syracuse, New York. That's a relocation expense. Now, we also see here an exception, two exceptions actually. So one, if the employee was terminated for misconduct, and the second was if you, the employer, misrepresented to the employee the job. So this is where, your offer letter comes into play, your job description comes into play, and making sure the job description matches reality on the ground, and not doing a bait and switch. So this really, one of the, I think, purposes here was to protect employees from a bait and switch. You induce me to come from Atlanta to do X, and then I get here, you're giving me Y as the job.
Yeah. So it comes down to, Mike, this kicks in if the employee voluntarily resigns, or they're let go for misconduct, and we just had the misconduct discussion. That's really what it comes down to, right?
Yep. I agree.
Yeah. Okay. And then the three remaining from the that we talked about before, with the property sold or leased and the sabbatical leave for educational and collective bargaining agreements. My reading is there isn't any there aren't any changes there. Those were pretty much left as is.
Yeah.
You agree?
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So it's really the big is the tuition and the and what we just talked about with the non-educational. So all right. So all right. I think that's all pretty clear for our listeners, Mike. So let's talk about quickly. I'm just looking at the time here. Enforcement.
Yeah.
Right? There are some changes in the enforcement language. So tell us about that.
Yeah, so the fine hasn't changed. The fine remains between $1,000 and $5,000 per violation. Key to remember: each employee is its own violation. That you're not. So if you're caught and you did something wrong, it's not one violation. If there are 10 employees, it's 10 violations. So you're looking at between $10,000 and $50,000 in fines. So we got to get this right. But now, since this law applies to all employers in New York, regardless of size, and there was a small business owners got a little irritated and were upset say, wait a minute, I'm teeny tiny business. If I make good faith compliance and I'm wrong, you're telling me I'm still potentially looking at $5,000. And what they did is they gave us some factors now for the Department of Labor to look at. The size of the employer's businesses, good faith compliance, the gravity of the violation, and history of prior violations. So, and then from that, the department will make a determination. But the reality is, folks, you're not looking at less than 1,000. You're looking at $1,000 to start, and so just make sure we get this right. We have 9 months left, and let's start the process of doing our inventory and then getting correct agreements in place.
Yep, and that's exactly what I was going to say, Mike. What are the next steps? And the next steps are let's look at the agreements, because you've got time, and let's make changes where we need to. And one of the areas, Mike, and again, let me know if you agree with this, is we're still not sure exactly what will happen. So, December 20th comes along. So agreements that were in place before then. So let's say some employer put something together in the end of 2025, and now it's December 20th, and they've got an agreement that doesn't necessarily comply, a repayment agreement, with what we just talked about. We're not sure. What are they going to do, right? Are they going to go back and say, oh, well, hey, now it applies retroactively, or it's all agreements entered into after, on and after December 19th. I don't think that question was answered, Mike.
Yeah, it definitely hasn't been answered in the statute, and it awaits the Department of Labor weighing in on. The only thing that I have seen was a one-liner in the statutory or the memo bill of the sponsor in the original law that talked about this applying to all agreements. And I don't know if that's accurate or not, because it's just part of the legislative history. My hope is, and it's nothing more than hope, that the department says its agreements entered into on or after 12/19/2026, and that would make our lives the easiest.
Yes. Yeah.
But I think we're going to find that out as the year progresses. So in the original podcast, remember we said, hey, take a breath, let's see what happens, and relax. But I think it is very important that we try to figure out what your best approach. Let's assume the worst, and prepare for the worst and hope for the best. I guess is the motto here. Yeah. But I also think, Rosemary, if the Department of Labor is smart, they're going to roll this out around September 1 or somewhere in there, right after Labor Day. They like rolling stuff out that weekend that relates to employers and employees. So that's when I'm going to start looking for it, because I think that is a good time for them to roll it out. Politically, it's probably a good time for them to say, hey, look, this is Kathy Herschel saying, this is what we're doing for you, and it's Labor Day. Yeah. We'll see.
Yeah, we'll see. Exactly. So, all right. Well, so Mike, I think that was really helpful. And like we said, hopefully everybody feels a little better now, a little more comfortable, because we were getting a lot of questions and we kept saying, wait. And so I think we're in a better spot than where we were back in January.
Yeah. And just one thing, listening to the last podcast and this one, not enough. You have homework to do. This is meant to sort of give you a very general outline, nothing more than that, to sort of give you that, I have enough now to get up to speed and move forward with that. And please make sure you reach out to counsel when you need to, because this is one of those areas I'm a little nervous about for employers.
Yeah. Well, and for a whole host of reasons, not the least of which is it could get real expensive real fast. Yeah. As you said, Mike, it could be 10 to 50,000. I mean, who knows, So, all right. Well, As always, Mike, it was awesome. And everybody, thank you for joining us. Listen to us on Spotify and all those other places that you can listen to us. Let us know what you want to hear about. Let us know if you have questions. And I don't know what we're going to be talking about next. As we said at the start, this is kind of in the middle of our handbook series, so it'll pick up after that. So I think Mike and I were toying with talking about the new rules related to independent contractors. So we may be dropping that in next, right, Mike?
Yes.
Yep. All right. All right, everybody. Thanks for listening. Thank you, Mike, and we'll talk soon. The Labor and Employment Podcast is available on barclaydamon.com, Spotify, and all major podcast platforms. Be sure to like, follow, and stay connected for future episodes.